The Emperor Valerian, master of a world teetering on the brink, felt the chill of the Syrian dawn not just on his aging skin, but deep within his bones. It was a chill that whispered of omens and the heavy price of power. He stood on the ramparts of Antioch, the great city, a slumbering giant beneath a sky the color of bruised plums. The year was 260 CE. He was 70 years old, an age when most men of his station would have retired to their countryside villas, surrounded by their grandchildren and the ghosts of their past glories. But Valerian was not like most men. He was Augustus, the Imperator, the last great hope of a Roman Empire tearing itself apart at the seams. For decades, the empire had been in a state of perpetual crisis. Usurpers rose and fell like bloody tides. The frontiers were under constant assault from barbarian tribes, and a devastating plague had swept through the provinces, leaving a trail of death and despair in its wake. Valerian, a seasoned senator and a man of the old Roman stock, had been hailed as a savior when he ascended to the throne 7 years prior. He had brought a semblance of stability, even appointing his son, Gallienus, as co-emperor to manage the turbulent western provinces while he himself took on the monumental task of securing the east. But the east was a wound that refused to heal. Here, the challenge was not a horde of disorganized barbarians, but a resurgent and formidable foe, the Sassanian Empire of Persia, led by the ambitious and cunning king of kings, Shapur I. Shapur, a man who saw himself as the heir to the great Achaemenid kings, dreamed of a restored Persian dominion that stretched to the shores of the Aegean. And Rome, in its weakened state, was a tempting prize. Valerian gazed eastward, towards the lands where Shapur's armies were gathering. He had come to the east to put an end to the Persian threat once and for all. He had brought with him a vast army, the pride of the Roman legions. Yet, a sense of foreboding clung to him like a shroud. The omens had been unfavorable. The plague that had ravaged his army was a grim reminder of their vulnerability. He had faced countless challenges in his long life, but this felt different. This was a clash of civilizations, a battle for the soul of the world. He was the embodiment of Roman power and dignity. What he could not have known, as the first rays of the sun painted the sky in hues of blood and gold, was that he was about to become a symbol of its ultimate humiliation. His end would not be a hero's death on the battlefield, but a spectacle of unimaginable pain and degradation. A story whispered in horror for centuries to come. A story that would begin with his capture and end with his skin being flayed from his still-living body. This is the story of the horrific death of Emperor Valerian. To understand the tragedy of Emperor Valerian, one must first understand the precarious world he inherited. The Roman Empire of the mid-3rd century CE was a far cry from the golden age of Augustus or the stable reign of the Antonines. Historians have termed this period the crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year span of chaos and upheaval that nearly brought the mighty empire to its knees. The crisis was a multifaceted beast, with its roots stretching back decades. The vastness of the empire, once a source of its strength, had become a crippling weakness. Its long frontiers were porous and constantly under pressure. In the north, Germanic tribes like the Goths, Franks, and Alemanni, growing in numbers and boldness, launched devastating raids deep into Roman territory. They sacked cities, plundered the countryside, and carried off thousands of captives, leaving a trail of destruction that shattered the sense of security the Pax Romana had once provided. The situation in the east was even more dire. The Parthian Empire, Rome's long-standing rival, had been overthrown in 224 CE by a new and far more dangerous dynasty, the Sassanians. The Sassanian kings, fueled by a zealous Zoroastrian faith and a powerful sense of national identity, saw themselves as the restorers of the ancient Persian glory. They laid claim to all the territories once held by the Achaemenid Empire, including vast swathes of Roman land in the Near East. Unlike the often fractious Parthians, the Sassanians were a centralized and highly organized military power. Their heavily armored cataphract cavalry was the most feared fighting force of its time, and their siege warfare techniques were sophisticated and deadly. This external pressure was compounded by a catastrophic internal breakdown. The imperial throne, once a position of immense power and prestige, had become a death trap. Between 235 and 284 CE, over 20 emperors and countless usurpers vied for control of the empire, most of them meeting a violent end after a reign of just a few years. These barracks emperors, proclaimed by their legions, ruled by the sword and were often overthrown by it. The constant civil wars drained the empire's resources, weakened its armies, and created a climate of political instability that made it impossible to address the growing external threats effectively. Economically, the empire was in a freefall. The incessant warfare demanded a constant supply of money, which the emperors, lacking a stable tax base, were forced to find through other means. They debased the currency, reducing the silver content of the denarius until it was little more than a worthless piece of bronze. This led to rampant inflation, which destroyed the savings of the middle class and made it impossible for merchants to conduct business. The economy reverted to a primitive system of barter, and the once thriving cities of the empire began to decline. To make matters worse, a devastating plague, likely smallpox, swept through the empire in the mid-3rd century. Known as the Plague of Cyprian, it is estimated to have killed millions of people, further depleting the empire's already dwindling population and manpower. The plague ravaged the army, weakened the economy, and created a pervasive sense of fear and despair. To make matters worse, a devastating plague, likely smallpox, swept through the empire in the mid-3rd century. Known as the Plague of Cyprian, it is estimated to have killed millions of people, further depleting the empire's already dwindling population and manpower. The plague ravaged the army, weakened the economy, and created a pervasive sense of fear and despair. Upon his ascension, Valerian immediately recognized the immense challenge before him. The empire was too vast and too beset by enemies to be ruled by a single man. He made the pragmatic decision to appoint his son, Gallienus, as co-emperor. Gallienus, a young and energetic man, would be responsible for the western provinces, where he would have to contend with the constant threat of Germanic invasions. Valerian, despite his advanced age, took on the even more daunting task of confronting the Sassanian menace in the east. Valerian's decision to personally lead the eastern campaign was a testament to his sense of duty and his understanding of the gravity of the situation. The east was not just a distant frontier, it was a vital part of the Roman world. The provinces of Syria, Egypt, and Asia Minor were among the wealthiest in the empire, providing crucial tax revenue, grain, and other resources. Their loss would be a catastrophic blow from which Rome might never recover. So, the old emperor, with the weight of a crumbling empire on his shoulders, marched eastwards at the head of a massive army. He was determined to crush the Sassanian threat and restore Roman glory. But the forces arrayed against him were far more formidable than he could have imagined. In the heart of Persia, a new king, a new empire, and a new ideology were on the rise, ready to challenge the might of Rome and change the course of history forever. While Rome was in the throes of its 3rd century crisis, a new and vibrant power was consolidating its strength in the east. The Sassanian Empire, founded in 224 CE by Shapur I, was a force to be reckoned with. Ardashir, a local Persian ruler, had overthrown the last Parthian king, Artabanus IV, and established a new dynasty that would rule Persia for over 4 centuries. The Sassanians were a stark contrast to their Parthian predecessors. While the Parthians had been a loose confederation of semi-independent nobles, the Sassanians created a highly centralized and bureaucratic state. They revived the ancient Persian traditions and promoted Zoroastrianism as the state religion, forging a strong sense of national identity that had been lacking under the more cosmopolitan Parthians. The Sassanian military was also a formidable force. They built upon the Parthian tradition of heavy cavalry, creating an elite corps of cataphracts who were clad in full mail armor and armed with lances and bows. These heavily armored horsemen were the backbone of the Sassanian army and were capable of smashing through even the most disciplined Roman legions. The Sassanians also developed sophisticated siege warfare techniques, which they used to capture numerous Roman cities in the east. Ardashir's son and successor, Shapur I, who ascended to the throne in 240 CE, was an even more ambitious and capable ruler than his father. Shapur was a brilliant military strategist and a charismatic leader who inspired fierce loyalty in his troops. He was also a devout Zoroastrian who saw himself as a divinely appointed king, tasked with restoring the glory of the ancient Persian Empire. Shapur's ambitions were not just a matter of personal pride. They were rooted in a deep-seated sense of historical grievance. For centuries, Persia had been a pawn in the great game of empires, conquered and ruled by foreign powers, from the Greeks of Alexander the Great to the Romans. Shapur and the Sassanians were determined to reverse this trend and re-establish Persia as a dominant world power. Shapur's early reign was marked by a series of stunning military victories against the Romans. He took advantage of the chaos and instability in the Roman Empire to launch a series of devastating campaigns in the east. In 244 CE, he defeated a Roman army led by Emperor Gordian III, who was killed in the battle. The new Roman emperor, Philip the Arab, was forced to sign a humiliating treaty with Shapur, paying a massive indemnity and ceding large swathes of Roman territory in Mesopotamia. This victory was a major turning point in the Roman-Sassanian conflict. It demonstrated that the Sassanians were not just a regional nuisance but a major threat to Roman dominance in the east. The capture of Roman cities and the defeat of Roman armies shattered the myth of Roman invincibility and sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. Shapur was not just a military conqueror. He was also a shrewd politician and a patron of the arts and sciences. He established a magnificent new capital at Ctesiphon, on the banks of the Tigris River, which he adorned with splendid palaces, temples, and gardens. He also founded a renowned academy at Shapur, which became a major center of learning, attracting scholars from all over the known world. Shapur's court was a vibrant and cosmopolitan center of culture and learning, where Persian, Greek, and Indian traditions mingled and flourished. He was a tolerant ruler who allowed his non-Zoroastrian subjects to practice their own religions, a policy that stood in stark contrast to the religious persecution that was often practiced in the Roman Empire. By the time Valerian arrived in the east in 253 CE, Shapur I was at the height of his power. He had consolidated his control over a vast and prosperous empire, built a formidable military machine, and established himself as a major player on the world stage. He was a confident and ambitious ruler who was not afraid to challenge the might of Rome. The clash between Valerian and Shapur was not just a conflict between two empires. It was a clash between two worlds, two ideologies, and two men who embodied the hopes and aspirations of their respective civilizations. Valerian, the old Roman traditionalist, was fighting to preserve a dying world order. Shapur, the young and ambitious Persian king, was fighting to create a new one. The stage was set for a confrontation that would have profound and lasting consequences for both empires. Valerian's eastern campaign began with a sense of cautious optimism. He was an experienced general, and the army he had assembled was one of the largest and best equipped that Rome had ever sent to the east. It consisted of veteran legions from all over the empire, supported by a large contingent of auxiliary troops and cavalry. The initial phase of the campaign was a success. Valerian managed to recapture the important city of Antioch, which had been sacked by the Persians a few years earlier. He then marched into Mesopotamia, where he laid siege to the city of Dur-Europos, a major Sassanian stronghold. However, the Roman army soon began to face a series of unforeseen challenges. The harsh desert climate took its toll on the soldiers, and the logistical challenges of supplying a large army in a hostile territory were immense. The Romans were also plagued by a devastating outbreak of disease, likely the same plague that had been ravaging the rest of the empire. The plague spread rapidly through the crowded Roman camps, killing thousands of soldiers and weakening the morale of the survivors. Despite these setbacks, Valerian pressed on with his campaign. He was determined to crush the Sassanian threat and restore Roman honor. He led his army deeper into Persian territory, towards the city of Edessa, where Shapur I had established his main camp. The road to Edessa was a long and arduous one. The Roman army had to march through a barren and unforgiving landscape, constantly harassed by Sassanian cavalry. The soldiers were exhausted, demoralized, and weakened by disease. Yet, they pressed on, driven by their loyalty to their emperor and their belief in the invincibility of the Roman legions. As the Roman army approached Edessa, they found themselves in a perilous situation. They were deep in enemy territory, far from their supply bases, and their lines of communication were constantly being threatened by Sassanian raiders. The Sassanian army, on the other hand, was fresh, well-supplied, and fighting on its home turf. Shapur I, a master of deception and psychological warfare, used a variety of tactics to further demoralize the Roman army. He sent emissaries to the Roman camp with false promises of peace, while at the same time launching surprise attacks on their outposts and supply lines. He also spread rumors and propaganda designed to sow dissent and confusion among the Roman soldiers. Valerian, despite his experience, seems to have been outmaneuvered by his cunning Sassanian adversary. He was a man of the old school, accustomed to fighting set-piece battles where the superior discipline and training of the Roman legions would usually prevail. He was ill-prepared for the kind of guerrilla warfare and psychological manipulation that Shapur employed with such devastating effect. The final confrontation between the two armies took place near the city of Edessa in 260 CE. The battle was a disaster for the Romans. The Sassanian army, with its superior cavalry and siege warfare techniques, completely outmaneuvered the exhausted and demoralized Roman legions. The Roman lines were broken, and the army was routed. What happened next is a matter of some debate among historians. According to some accounts, Valerian, seeing that the battle was lost, surrendered to Shapur in the hope of negotiating an honorable peace. Other accounts suggest that he was betrayed by his own officers, who handed him over to the Persians in exchange for their own safety. Whatever the circumstances, the outcome was the same. For the first time in its long and glorious history, a Roman emperor had been captured alive by a foreign enemy. The psychological impact of this event was profound. The myth of Roman invincibility had been shattered, and the empire was plunged into a new and even deeper crisis of confidence. The Battle of Edessa was a turning point not just in the Roman-Sassanian conflict, but in the history of the ancient world. The capture of a Roman emperor was an event of unprecedented significance, a symbol of the shifting balance of power between the two great empires. For the Romans, it was a moment of profound shock and humiliation. The emperor was not just a political leader. He was a sacred figure, the embodiment of Roman power and dignity. His capture was a sacrilege, a violation of the natural order of things. For the Sassanians, it was a moment of triumph and exultation. The capture of a Roman emperor was a powerful symbol of their ascendancy, a tangible proof of their military and cultural superiority. It was a victory that would be celebrated in Persian art and literature for centuries to come. Shapur I was not content with simply capturing the Roman emperor. He was determined to use him as a tool of propaganda and psychological warfare. He subjected Valerian to a series of humiliating and degrading treatments, designed to shatter his spirit and demonstrate the absolute power of the Sassanian king. According to the most lurid accounts, which are found in the writings of the Christian historian Lactantius, Valerian was forced to serve as a human footstool for Shapur. Whenever the Sassanian king mounted his horse, he would place his foot on the back of the stooping Roman emperor. This act of public humiliation was a deliberate and calculated inversion of Roman imperial ceremony, where conquered kings were often forced to kneel before the emperor. Valerian was also reportedly forced to wear the imperial purple, a symbol of his former power, while he was paraded in chains through the cities of the Sassanian Empire. This was a cruel and taunting reminder of his fallen status, a spectacle designed to entertain the Persian populace and intimidate Roman sympathizers. The accounts of Valerian's captivity are, of course, highly colored by the biases of their authors. Lactantius, a Christian writer, was keen to portray Valerian, a persecutor of Christians, as a man who had been justly punished by God. Persian sources, on the other hand, were eager to celebrate the glory of their king and the triumph of their empire. However, even if we discount the most lurid details, there is no doubt that Valerian's captivity was a brutal and humiliating experience. He was a proud and old man, stripped of his dignity and forced to endure the taunts and jeers of his captors. He was a living symbol of Roman decline, a constant reminder of the empire's vulnerability. The news of Valerian's capture sent shockwaves throughout the Roman world. The empire was already in a state of crisis, and this new disaster only served to exacerbate the situation. Usurpers rose up in the provinces, and the frontiers were once again beset by barbarian invasions. Gallienus, Valerian's son and co-emperor, was left to deal with the fallout of his father's capture. He was a capable and energetic ruler, but the challenges he faced were immense. He had to contend with a series of rebellions and invasions, while at the same time trying to maintain the morale of a demoralized and divided empire. Gallienus made several attempts to secure his father's release, but all his efforts were in vain. Shapur I had no intention of letting his prized captive go. Valerian was too valuable a propaganda tool, a living testament to the power and glory of the Sassanian Empire. The years Valerian spent in captivity were a long and agonizing ordeal. He was a man who had once ruled the world, now reduced to the status of a common slave. He was a living trophy, a symbol of Persian victory and Roman humiliation. The accounts of his daily life in captivity are sparse and often contradictory, but they all paint a picture of a man who was subjected to a constant barrage of physical and psychological abuse. He was reportedly forced to perform menial tasks, such as cleaning the royal stables and carrying water for the Persian soldiers. He was also subjected to a series of humiliating and degrading rituals, designed to break his spirit and remind him of his fallen status. The most famous of these rituals, the one that is most often cited in historical accounts, is the story of the human footstool. According to this account, whenever Shapur I mounted his horse, he would force Valerian to kneel before him and use his back as a stepping stone. This act of public humiliation was a powerful symbol of the Sassanian king's contempt for his Roman captive. The story of the human footstool is, of course, a dramatic and memorable one, but it is not the only account of Valerian's humiliation. Other sources report that he was forced to wear a collar and chain, like a common slave, and that he was often paraded through the streets of the Sassanian capital, where he was subjected to the taunts and jeers of the crowd. It is difficult to know for certain how much of this is true and how much is the product of later embellishment and propaganda. However, there is no doubt that Valerian's captivity was a brutal and degrading experience. He was a proud and old man, a man who had once commanded the respect and admiration of the entire Roman world. To be reduced to the status of a common slave, to be subjected to the daily humiliation of a captive, must have been a devastating blow to his spirit. What is perhaps most remarkable about Valerian's captivity is the way in which he endured it. According to some accounts, he remained defiant and unbowed, refusing to submit to the will of his captors. He reportedly maintained his imperial dignity, even in the face of the most extreme provocation. Other accounts, however, suggest that he was a broken man, a man who had been shattered by the weight of his humiliation. They report that he often wept and begged for mercy, but that his pleas were met with nothing but scorn and derision. Whatever the truth of these accounts, one thing is certain: Valerian's captivity was a long and agonizing ordeal. It was a slow and painful death, a death that was designed to be as humiliating and degrading as possible. The exact circumstances of Valerian's death are even more shrouded in mystery and controversy than the details of his captivity. The most gruesome and enduring account, the one that has captured the imagination of historians and artists for centuries, is the story of his flaying. According to this account, after several years of captivity, Valerian finally died, either from old age, disease, or at the hands of his captors. Shapur I, not content with simply burying his old adversary, decided to subject him to one final act of humiliation. He ordered that Valerian's body be flayed, and that his skin be preserved and displayed in a Persian temple as a permanent monument to Sassanian victory. The act of flaying, the removal of the skin from a living or recently deceased body, was a particularly brutal and barbaric form of execution. It was a slow and agonizing process, a process that was designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain and suffering. The details of Valerian's flaying are, of course, a matter of some debate. Some accounts suggest that he was flayed alive, while others report that he was already dead when the procedure was carried out. Some accounts even suggest that he was forced to drink molten gold before he was flayed, a particularly cruel and ironic form of execution for a man who had once been the master of the world's wealthiest empire. Whatever the exact details, there is no doubt that Valerian's death was a horrific and brutal one. It was a death that was designed to be as humiliating and degrading as possible, a death that was meant to serve as a stark and terrifying warning to all who would dare to challenge the might of the Sassanian Empire. The flaying of Valerian was not just a random act of cruelty. It was a carefully calculated act of political and religious symbolism. In the Zoroastrian tradition, the removal of the skin was associated with the concept of spiritual purification, the separation of the soul from the corrupting influence of the flesh. By subjecting Valerian to this particular form of execution, Shapur I was not just killing a man. He was purifying the Persian land of Roman contamination. The flayed skin of Valerian was reportedly preserved and displayed in a major Zoroastrian temple, where it served as a constant reminder of the Sassanian victory. It was a grotesque and macabre trophy, a symbol of the shifting balance of power between the two great empires. The news of Valerian's gruesome death sent a new wave of shock and horror throughout the Roman world. The capture of an emperor was bad enough, but the news that he had been flayed alive was almost too much to bear. It was a blow to Roman pride, a wound that would fester for generations to come. The immediate aftermath of Valerian's death was a period of chaos and confusion. The Roman army in the east, already demoralized by its defeat at Edessa, was now leaderless and in a state of disarray. The Sassanian army, on the other hand, was emboldened by its victory and continued its advance into Roman territory. Gallienus, Valerian's son and co-emperor, was left to pick up the pieces. He was a capable and energetic ruler, but the challenges he faced were immense. He had to contend with a series of rebellions and invasions, while at the same time trying to restore the morale of a demoralized and divided empire. One of his first acts was to launch a new campaign in the east, in an attempt to avenge his father's death and restore Roman honor. However, the campaign was a failure. The Roman army, still weakened by its defeat at Edessa, was no match for the confident and well-organized Sassanian forces. The failure of Gallienus's eastern campaign was a major blow to Roman prestige. It demonstrated that the Sassanian victory at Edessa was not a fluke, but a sign of a fundamental shift in the balance of power between the two empires. In the years that followed, the Roman Empire continued to be plagued by a series of internal and external crises. The frontiers were under constant assault, and the imperial throne was once again a death trap. The empire was in a state of freefall, and it seemed as if nothing could stop its decline. The story of Valerian's death became a powerful symbol of Roman decline. It was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of even the most powerful empires. It was a story that was told and retold for centuries to come, a story that served as a constant reminder of the dark and brutal realities of the ancient world. The death of Emperor Valerian was more than just the end of a single man's life. It was a turning point in the history of the ancient world. It was a moment when the seemingly invincible Roman Empire was brought to its knees, a moment when the balance of power between East and West was irrevocably shifted. The story of Valerian's death, with its horrific and gruesome details, has resonated through the centuries. It has been the subject of countless books, poems, and paintings, a testament to its enduring power to shock and fascinate. But the story of Valerian is more than just a tale of horror and brutality. It is a story about the nature of power, the fragility of civilization, and the enduring human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. Valerian's death was a brutal and humiliating one, but it was not in vain. It served as a wake-up call for the Roman Empire, a stark and terrifying reminder of the dangers of complacency and overconfidence. It forced the Romans to re-examine their military and political strategies, to adapt to a new and more dangerous world. The reforms that were initiated in the wake of Valerian's death, particularly under the emperors Diocletian and Constantine, would ultimately save the Roman Empire from complete collapse. They would usher in a new era of stability and prosperity, an era that would see the empire transformed into a new and more resilient entity. The story of Valerian's death is also a story about the power of symbolism. The flayed skin of the Roman emperor, displayed in a Persian temple, was a powerful symbol of Sassanian victory and Roman humiliation. It was a symbol that was designed to be as enduring as the empires themselves. And yet, in the end, it was the Roman Empire that endured. The Sassanian Empire, for all its power and glory, would eventually be conquered and absorbed by the rising tide of Islam. The Roman Empire, on the other hand, would continue to exist in one form or another for another 1,000 years. The story of Valerian's death is a complex and multifaceted one, a story that can be read on many different levels. It is a story about the clash of civilizations, the nature of power, and the enduring human capacity for both good and evil. It is a story that continues to resonate with us today, a story that serves as a powerful reminder of the dark and brutal realities of the ancient world. And in its own gruesome way, it is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the unquenchable thirst for freedom. Valerian, the emperor flayed alive, became a martyr in some Christian traditions, his suffering a symbol of the persecution they endured, and his fate a divine retribution for his own actions against them. In the end, the story of Valerian's death is a chilling reminder of the cyclical nature of history, of the rise and fall of empires, and of the enduring human struggle for power, glory, and survival. Thank you for watching Silent Atrocities. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more true hidden history stories.